Welcome to the Lessons from the Great Coaches podcast.
I've learned that you don't do it alone.
You learn so many different things from so many different coaches.
That's an elite learning environment.
Failure is not a problem. How you deal with it is a problem.
How to be resilient.
How important it is to infuse joy in the process of learning.
To be a good coach, you've got to give more than you take.
What an interesting life it is to be a leader.
Hello and welcome to the Great Coaches podcast, where we believe that there is no algorithm for leadership, and so we interview great coaches from around the world to try and find ideas to help all of us be better leaders. As the podcast has grown, the great coaches we've interviewed have shared so much insight and wisdom that we decided to create episodes dedicated entirely to the ideas that have resonated with us the most. Today's episode is on the topic of mindset as a superpower, and we're joined for the discussion by Allister McCaw. Alistair is that rare person who excels across disciplines and industries. In addition to being an author who has sold over 300,000 books, his podcast ranks in the top 1% in the world, and for the last 25 years he has consulted and worked with Olympic gold medalists, Grand Slam champions, Fortune 500 companies, NCAA Colleges, and professional sports teams from all over the world. He has a new book out called Mindset is Your Superpower, and today we delve into it. And just before we go to the interview, today's podcast is brought to you by the Macquarie University Business School's MBA program. Designed to empower, challenge, and transform, the Macquarie MBA gives you the business skills and knowledge you need to succeed in an evolving global economy. The program bridges the gap between theory and real-world application, bringing together world-leading professors, executives, and industry partners to teach you how business can be used for good. I have just started working with the team at Macquarie on some projects and can attest to the quality of the people and material. To find out more, search for Macquarie University Business School's MBA. And now, please enjoy our interview with Allister McCaw.
You're listening to the Lessons from the Great Coaches podcast.
Good morning, Allister McCaw, and welcome back to the Great Coaches podcast.
Paul, it's great to be back. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, Alistair, I always like to ask you this question. Where are you in the world? Where have you been recently as well? And what have you been up to today?
I am back at home in Florida. I just spent about 4.5 weeks in Europe, which was a great trip. Really enjoyed it. Always enjoy my time over there. More specifically, I was in France this time and just spent a little bit of time in London on the way back. But yeah, back in Florida. Good to be home.
The life of an elite level mindset coach. For those that are listening and who don't follow Alistair, I thoroughly recommend his social media feed. He travels to some great places and gets to meet some great people. But we're here to talk about the new book, Mindset is Your Superpower. It's a great read, Alistair. I know it's number 7 now that you've put out. I devoured it over the weekend a few months back, and I wanted to start actually with a quote. In the book, you say, "There will always be someone who can't see your worth. Just make sure that person isn't you." And you talk about how those words were the catalyst for you becoming a world champion in duathlon. But when I read that, I wondered if it was, in fact, where your journey with the idea of mindset started.
Well, Paul, I'm going to have to correct you straight off the bat there that I didn't become a world champion. I was actually second. The world champion was 7 seconds in front of me, so I saw it all unfold in front of me. But I was happy with second. It was the best I could do on the day. I would say it takes me back to my school days. I remember specifically being in the cross country team, and there was this teacher that I didn't get particularly. We didn't get particularly on. We didn't see eye to eye a lot of the times. And I remember us getting off the bus and we were late for a meeting. I think the race was to start in 5 minutes, and we'd been sitting on the school bus for about an hour getting to this location. And she said, right, everybody get off the bus and start stretching and then go up to the start line. Now, already at a young age, I was always very curious and very, reading about sports and sports science and the mental side and so on. So, to answer your question, it started at a very, very young age. I don't know why, but it was just all about improving myself. And of course, back then we didn't have Google and we didn't have the internet. So you just have to just try and figure it out yourself. You'd go to the library, for example. And I said to this teacher, shouldn't we rather go for a jog first to warm up the body and then stretch? And she absolutely freaked out at me. And one of the things she said to me is, McCaw, you're not going to amount to much in life. And that was like, I will never forget those words. And it was something that, thank goodness it could break somebody, or it could, in my case, which I was very fortunate, I thought, I'm going to prove you wrong. And that was something that I held on to and probably still do to this day, is that, never underestimate your value, never underestimate your worth, no matter what anybody says to you. And, writing that book, this is not just about sports, this is about life, is, never undervalue yourself. We all have the potential to do great things if we're willing to put in the work. That is, I want to add that on. But yeah, that's where it started for me, really.
You talk also about the power of consistency in the book and how you see it as being the difference between the good and the great. But Alistair, consistency is so hard to develop for many of us. Well, where do you start?
Yeah, consistency for me is the secret sauce, Paul. It really is. I like to say that the average do it sometimes, the good do it most of the time, the great do it all of the time. And that's why the great athletes or the great performers or the great people in business, for example, are where they are, is because they're able to stay consistent in their daily habits, their daily routines, the things they just do on a daily basis. And yes, it is difficult. That's why greatness is so hard to achieve, is because we can do it sometimes or when we feel like it, but consistency is about doing it all the time, and especially when we don't feel like it, for example. And I think with all the high performers that I've been able to work with or work alongside, Paul, that's definitely one of the key traits that they all had was consistency, and not just consistency in their behaviors and actions, but consistency in their word as well. And of course, we know consistency in your word is where trust is built. So it's such a massive thing in life, is that people know that you're reliable, people know that you're consistent in your actions, your behaviors, your words. And I'll be the first one to put my hand up, Paul, to say it is very, very difficult to be in that mindset all the time. But that's really, really where it is. Without consistency, I don't think greatness is possible, whatever that greatness is to you. And I just want to make that clear, is we all define success differently. We all define greatness differently. But to get to those levels, that's where consistency is the secret sauce.
I think consistency and emotional regulation is very important with leaders. Many of the great coaches talk about it. And I think many of the great coaches in the past didn't have it. But equally back then, this undulating emotion, this ability to switch it on and switch it off, seemed to be rewarded, looked up to. But I think that's definitely changed as time's gone on.
Yeah, if we look at sports, and I know obviously, majority of the listeners here will be from a sports background or coaches, for example, is, the mastery of skills, the mastery of a craft requires consistency. And it's that monotonous repetition, rep after rep, day after day, that's required to become great at something. Ronaldo, Federer, Serena, Michael Phelps, the list goes on, LeBron James. These are athletes that have repetitively taken as many shots as possible, that we have no clue away from. One story I actually mentioned, I think it was in this book, or maybe it was in Habits That Make a Champion, was arriving early at Stanford University one morning at, I think it was 6:30 in the morning, to get an early practice in, and parking the car, I heard balls getting thumped and a coach feeding balls. And I thought, gosh, who's here so early in the morning? And this was at a tournament at Stanford University in California. And I got closer, and it was Serena Williams at 6:30 in the morning, nobody else in sight except her and her coach at the time, and already drenched in sweat. I'd arrived there with my player thinking, wow, we're going to be the first here and we're going to show the rest of the tournament how focused and dedicated we are. But there's Serena. Serena had already finished her practice probably by 8:30 and gone back to the hotel for breakfast and so on, while other players were just getting out of bed. So there's an example of commitment and someone that has consistency.
You worked for a long time alongside the great coach Nick Bollettieri. You speak about him in glowing terms in many of your books. What did you take away from that experience that's still with you today?
Oh, so many things. I think one of the key things, Paul, was really just his enthusiasm, his love for what he did. So passion would be the first thing. Authenticity. Nick was who he was. His people skills stand out for me. He was great with people. It didn't matter who you were, what level you were. A lot of people think that Nick only worked with, the best of the best and, number one players in the world, like Boris Becker and the Williams sisters and Mary Pierce and so on and so forth. But he worked with recreational players, families, etc. And he was brilliant with all of them. I observed and was alongside him many a day on the court in Bradenton, Florida. And he was the same, talk about consistency. This is a great example. He was the same coach at 5 p.m. in the afternoon than he was at 6 a.m. in the morning. Nick was on the court 9-10 hours a day sometimes, loved it until he was 86, 87, where unfortunately he started to get a little bit ill and he had to stop. But, Nick believed, and we talk about optimism, Nick believed he would be coaching still at 100. He had that kind of mindset as well, and that rubbed off on others, optimism. But yeah, Nick was the greatest motivator as well. We talk about coaches that you can't have everything. It's impossible to be, excellent in everything. But the thing that Nick had was he was the number one motivator. I saw Nick turn around players that were in massive slumps and couldn't win a match, go on to win tournaments a week or two later just by spending an hour with him. It's almost like he had a magic wand. But like many other great coaches, Nick could just make you feel special. And I think just one more thing, and like I said, Paul, I could go on and on about this and tell you all the qualities, but I never saw him have a bad day. I never saw him in a negative mood, which was, even things were going on in his life, and we all have challenges and we all have problems. I've never met a human being that doesn't. Nick was always upbeat, positive. He could get strict. He had his boundaries, and there was rules at the Bollettieri Tennis Academy, but he was always in a good mood and positive, and that's for me, incredible.
I remember you saying in one of our other interviews that likability is your best ability as a leader, and I think Nick Bollettieri often, from what I hear from many different people, he had that skill as well.
Well, if there's just one thing, sorry, I know I could add on, and this is a great lesson for coaches out there as well, is, for example, if a junior player came along to the academy and they were usually star juniors, these were the best juniors in the world, in the country. Something Nick always did was made the rest of the siblings in the family feel special. So a lot of the times, there's maybe a star athlete in the family, and they get most of the attention everywhere they go. So if they go to an event or they go to a school event or church or whatever, everybody's asking that particular kid how they're doing, and they're the star player. And Nick always put the attention on the rest of the siblings, the brothers and sisters, and spent time with them. And that was another incredible standout of just his awareness of a situation, and not just the star kid gets all the attention.
Oh, terrific story. My own brother actually was somewhat of a childhood prodigy at Australian rules football. He was one of the youngest players, I think, to play in the senior level. And he often found that when we would go out, he would get all the attention, but he hated it. So I had to sort of step in the middle and try to detract a little bit to get it off him. So I think that's a great insight that Nick had. But back to the book for a minute. There's another quote in there that it resonated with me very strongly because it took me, I didn't learn about this until I was in my early 30s. And the quote is, you may not be able to control every situation and its outcome, but you can control your attitude and how you respond to it. It's a theme that's central to the Viktor Frankl book, Man's Search for Meaning. And I can remember the moment that someone told me this. I can remember sitting on a bus hearing it. It's such a simple idea, but again, Alistair, it's very hard to put into practice. Where can we start if we want to move towards this idea?
I think the simplest way, Paul, is controllables and uncontrollables, is defining in your life, in your career, in your relationships, all these things that matter. What is controllable and what's not controllable. And to be more aware and cognizant of the things that you give your energy to and the things that you can't really give your energy to that are uncontrollable. So I think that's really where it starts. Working with athletes, it's really one of the first areas I start with the discussion of, okay, you're going to write down what's controllable in your sport and what's uncontrollable in your sport. And so, for example, controllable would be my attitude, the thing that we mentioned, my game plan, how coachable I am. We can go down the list. For example, what's uncontrollable are things like the weather if you're playing outside, for example, or a referee's decision or a cheating opponent. All these things we can go down this list. So it's to identify what's controllable, what's not controllable, and then to really just be more aware of those things in your daily life and know where to put your energy and where to let things go. Now, easier said than done, absolutely. I am still a project in that as well. But that's definitely helped when I'm having discussions or someone's asked me for advice. I'd usually say, well, is it a controllable? And okay, good. What are you able to do about it? What are your steps forward? So yeah, that's an incredibly powerful quote. That's really helped me on my journey as well.
To continue on the theme of great quotes in the book, there's another one around self-talk. Now, I do some work as an executive coach, and this is a big topic that I engage with people on. And you provide some good insight here, and I think some good advice. You say a positive person can still have negative thoughts. However, the biggest difference lies in how quickly the positive person recognizes and changes that negative thought into a positive one. And there's plenty of, we're seeing research now on, it's not the voice itself, but how you respond to that voice that's important and the speed with which you respond to it. But could I flip it around, Alistair, if it's not too personal, and ask you how you came to learn about this voice and how to do this a little better?
Yeah, it definitely took some time. I wish I'd grasped onto it a little bit earlier in my life, Paul. It would have saved me a lot of energy. And it's still something I'm challenged with today, because the fact of the matter is you cannot control your thoughts, but you can control what you do with your thoughts. So I don't know if you've heard of the 5-second rule. And it's something that I like to give athletes as well, and actually anybody can use this, to be honest, is that you're allowed to entertain that thought for no longer than 5 seconds. So if it's a missed putt on the golf range, on the golf course, sorry, if it's a missed shot in tennis or squash or badminton or whatever it may be, is that your first initial thought is, oh, shucks, oh, damn, I missed that. I can't believe I missed it. And there's that negativity. However, in that 5-second window, you're able to realize, well, that's not a very helpful comment. And you change that straight away to something more positive, or you look forward. So there was 2 words I'd use with people called the FF, which was forget and focus. So forget the last shot, focus on the next. And it's a lesson for life as well, is that I've got to forget what happened there and focus on what's important next. So yeah, it's something that's it's a challenge every day. I mean, for anybody, nobody's arrived, and we're all attacked with negative thoughts on a daily basis, unexpectedly. But I think, again, it comes down to that word, Paul, of awareness, is being aware of your thoughts. you can be positive but still get negative thoughts. But again, like you said in that quote there, the difference is the positive people can move on quicker because they're more aware of it, and B, they replace it with something that's more helpful and positive moving forward. So look, the mindset is a skill. It has to be trained like anything else. Nothing comes naturally. You're not born a winner. You're not born a loser. You're born a chooser. And you're born, you choose the mindset that you're going to have. And that's every single day. That is work. Just like, a professional golfer or a professional football player, or whatever, goes to practice every day. You don't just reach a certain level and you've arrived. You're obviously going to start losing those skills. The mindset is the same thing as well, is that you have to purposefully and deliberately keep training the mind. I played a sport called pickleball here in America. I don't know if it's reached Australia yet, but it's like almost like a version of padel or mini tennis, if you like. And I'm challenged every morning on the court. If I miss a bad shot, and some of the guys that I play with in the morning tease me because they're saying, well, hey, you write all these books on positivity and mindset, but we see you losing your cool. And then I like to remind them, well, it was only for 5 seconds, and then I moved on to the next shot. So yeah, even for somebody that writes books on positivity and so on, I also get negative. I'm like anybody else, but the question is, how quickly can you move on from it?
I think one of our earlier conversations, you were telling me about Tiger Woods and his 10-step rule, where he takes 10 steps after he counts them out apparently, and then just moves on. Gives himself 10 steps, which I thought was very powerful. And I know I've spoken to a lot of people about the power of doorknobs. Sort of, you can hold the thought until you touch a doorknob, and then that act of opening a door is a very symbolic one, and you have to move forward and close the door behind you. But enough of the pop psychology. Coach K, he comes up a lot in your writing. It comes up a lot in your social media posts. You talk about him a lot. Probably as much, I think, as Nick Bollettieri. I know that he's had a significant influence on you in your life. But what are the lessons that he's left you with that have resonated the most?
I wish I'd been able to spend more time with Coach K. He was obviously a very, very busy man and held down a very powerful position as well within Duke University and USA basketball. I think for me, and I've mentioned this before on one of our episodes, Paul, was asking him that question, like, you've achieved so much success. How have you been able to sustain that success over 42 years? And, he mentioned that, sometimes you only see from the outside the trophies and the successful seasons, etc. But, you don't see all the other things that go on behind it. But he said, Alistair, it's not just a lesson in sports, it's a lesson in life as well, as it's your ability to adapt. He said the best performers in the world, in their jobs, in their positions, in their fields, are able to adapt quicker to change. And, Paul, this conversation took place about a month or two before COVID started in March 2020, was it? Gosh, I think 2020. Yeah. So this was, I think, when was this? Maybe January of 2020. And those were words that really stuck by me when COVID set in, for example, is your ability to adapt. There's again, getting back, there was controllables, there was uncontrollables. We couldn't control the situation of what the government would choose and all the rules and restrictions that we had, but how were we going to adapt to those? We had to adapt to our everyday life. We had to adapt to our work. Things like Zoom and Microsoft Windows and all these things that we had to adapt to instead of having live conferences or live meetings with our teammates or colleagues, for example. So we had to adapt to so much. So that is definitely one of the main standout lessons that Coach K taught. Also, just like Nick as well, his people skills. He had this ability to make you feel special. When I met him, he didn't know who I was, but he was asking me questions. He was very curious about me, and I was just really surprised by that, because I wanted to obviously ask him as much as I could in the limited time that I had that particular day, not knowing if I'd ever meet him again. And he was asking me questions, which just showed me the humility of the man, the curiosity of him, to find out about what you do, what you think. And for me, that's probably what made him a standout coach. One of the best coaches in the world was his curiosity, his humility, in other people.
I get a lot of people writing to me asking for if I could interview Coach K or Mike Krzyzewski. I've got through to his PA, but Mike politely declined. So for those listening, I will keep trying. I think he's risen in prominence since he was featured in that TV show, The Bear. But I will keep trying. I think it would be lovely to get him on. He's spanned generations, which I think will be interesting. He lived through that period where coaches were this firebrand and were influenced by military leaders, and he's emerged as someone who's been, to your point earlier in this interview, consistent through that whole journey. The way he talks and engages with young men is his area. I think it would be fascinating.
He went to West. Yeah, sorry, Paul. He went to West Point, which was a very famous and popular military school here in America. But getting back to when Mike was 75, I think maybe in his last season at Duke, which was 2022, I think, and speaking to players as well is just his ability to adapt to the different generations and his ability to adapt to the game that was changing. He never copied and pasted a season from the season before. So even if they had a winning season, he didn't say, well, that worked, let's just do the same as last season. Everything changed. The game would change, the players would change, the opponents would change. So he had to change as a coach and his strategy and his approach to the players, for example. And just like any other coach in the modern era, you'd have to okay, what's our rules going to be about cell phones? What's our rules going to be about being late to meetings, for example? To deal with the same things that like any other coach had to.
Alistair, you talk in the book about, well, actually, you've talked about it in this interview too, the power of awareness. But in the book, you talk about the 3 questions you ask yourself at the end of each day.
Yeah, these are 3 questions that have really helped me self-reflect. And I believe that self-development and self-improvement comes from self-reflection. So there's 3 questions I like to ask myself at the end of each day. And, I used to journal it, but I now actually just ask myself it. And it's become a habit that I've ingrained in myself that I don't forget it. It really, when I put my head on the pillow, it just comes automatically to me. And those 3 questions is, what did I do well today? It's important for us to reflect on the things that we did do well. The second question is, what could I have done better today? And that could be absolutely anything. It could be a conversation that you had, or maybe you were a little bit snappy or rude or whatever it may be, but it's good to reflect on that. And then the third question is, who did I make better today? Which really aligns with part of my purpose and part of my values as well, is that I want to make other people around me better. That's one of the things that gets me up every morning, is who can I improve today? Who can I get better? So those 3 questions have been really, really powerful for me, because, it's so easy for us just to remember the things that we haven't done well, or beat ourselves up about something that didn't go well today, for example, or a mistake we made in the game or whatever it may be. But it's important to reflect on those 3 things, I believe. What did I do well today? What could I have done better today? And who did I make better today?
Oh, they're terrific. They're terrific questions. I particularly like that third one. I think an element of selflessness every day helps build resilience. But Alistair, maybe just one final question, if I could. And it's back to this idea of the power of mindset. And you use a story at the end about the basketball coach, Eric Spoelstra. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I know he's a famous coach. I've never heard his name read out loud. Can you share with us that story and why you found it to be such a great example?
Yeah, well, Eric Spoelstra, who's gone on to win, I think, 3 NBA titles with the Miami Heat, and he's been with the franchise for over 20 years, maybe a little bit longer, which in the modern era of sports is just unheard of. because, after maybe 1 or 2 seasons, you get let go. But he's been able to stand the test of time there in Miami, which is not an easy fan base either. They demand results, and especially after winning the NBA titles in 2007, I think 2008. That was the era of LeBron James and Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade. Just an incredible team at that time. But Eric started in the early 90s in the video as a video assistant. And, he was just one of the guys in the back office that would cut video, record practices, and then give it to Coach Pat Riley, who's now the CEO of the Miami Heat. And Pat Riley was so impressed by this kid's attitude and his work ethic. And, he'd always be working extra hours, never asking for extra money or extra time. But he was always engulfed in his work and the quality of his work. And there was one day when Pat asked Eric if he would give the breakdown of their practice to the team. Now, of course, Eric was just this guy that was just the video guy at the Miami Heat. Now you've got all these 6'8" superstars standing in front of you, waiting for this kid in the back room to now give their practice breakdown. Anyway, Eric went ahead, did a great job. Pat was super impressed, and cut a long story short, Eric was eventually promoted to be head coach of the Miami Heat, which was, a lot of people were very skeptical about it because of his background. But just a lesson in terms of discipline, hard work, consistency, all these things that we've just spoken about in this podcast, Paul, his enthusiasm, his passion, and he's gone on to become one of the most successful NBA basketball coaches. So that's just an example, and those are the stories I love to talk about in my books. About having, I'm not saying zero talent, but really just maximizing everything you have to become the best that you can be. And that's what Eric has done, and he's still to this day the head coach at Miami Heat.
Oh, it's a great story in tenacity, and I look forward to reading a little bit more about him. I wasn't as aware of his story until I read about it in your book. But Alistair, it's a great book. Mindset is Your Superpower. I'll put the link in the show notes. I thoroughly recommend it to everyone. It's quick, it's easy to read, and you'll walk away with a couple of great nuggets that you can bring into your life straight away. So, Alistair, great to connect with you again. I wish you all the best on wherever your travels are taking you next.
Thanks, Paul. It's always a pleasure. Keep up the great work.
Hi, everyone. You have been listening to Allister McCaw talking about his new book, Mindset is Your Superpower. I hope you got a lot out of Alistair's style. He has great stories, great energy, and I always find myself making notes and walking away with at least a couple of ideas to share with my own team. And just before we go, if you have any feedback, then please let us know. Just like Christian Floyd Ratton, who said, "Hey Paul, just wanted to say a massive congratulations for starting and continuing the Great Coaches podcast. As an early career psychologist within sport and performance, I found every conversation to be extremely fascinating and insightful." Thanks, Christian. We love the interaction with the people around the world who listen. So if you have any feedback or comments, please let us know. And of course, if they're positive ones, then let your friends and family know too. All the details on how to connect with us are in the show notes or on our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com.